Hello and welcome to Future of Film's Virtual Production Revolution, our special show on the future of filmmaking and the pioneers who are making virtual production a reality. I'd like to say a huge thank you to all of our supporters who have made this series possible. Epic Games and Unreal Engine, Brompton Technology, and Garden Studios in London, whose incredible virtual production stage I am now sat on. So that just leaves me to say thank you again for listening and watching, and I hope you enjoy this episode of Virtual Production Revolution. It's great to be here. Great to be talking today about virtual production. I wanted to ask you about Garden Studios. This is obviously where we are on the virtual production stage, but tell me a little bit about the vision for the studio and what brought you into this part of the business.
That's a good question. It's sort of a little bit like, it feels a bit like a culmination of a career in film. There's always been a through line that technology is part of it. So whether it's around the cinema experience at Picture House, or Arts Alliance Media with the digitization, or Love Film with first lots of DVDs flying around and then digital experiences, and obviously with the film school. And production and distribution, and all kinds of different things. It all boils down to the combination of aspirations, all these technical wonder instruments, and talent with dreams. And to some extent, I have been looking at what's happened to the studio environment. And feel like it's become a bit soulless. It's been run like factories, largely been taken over by private equity, and very little of what goes on from a studio management perspective is around the community element. And I feel that's the most important thing we do. So the one thing we've got aspirations of being really good at this kind of stuff. But the other is actually more going back a bunch of steps and figure out what's at the core. And the core is about lots of talented people, much younger than myself, who have lots of stories to tell. And so that's also why we set up Garden Studios. We've been really lucky to be on the campus at Ealing Studios for many years with the film school, and we've kind of grown and grown, and we need more space. So we figured out we needed to do something new. So we've been looking for space for some time, and then we said also that the industry needs some different ways of thinking. So we said, well, let's combine them. And then during the pandemic, there suddenly was a lot of opportunity to get a cluster of buildings in the same area here in Park Royal, and an opportunity to do something that was at size and could be really ambitious. So we then said, well, what are the things that we really need to get a grip on? And I think you could then say, well, it has to be virtual production. That is true. But actually the grip we need to get on was to get the ethos of the place right. That's what it starts with. And I'm not so sure we have got it right, but I think we have the aspiration of getting it right. And that's so that's kind of the drive, and then everything else is sort of falling in place beyond that. So, I was listening to you talking about kind of the future of film, and I'm also wondering what to kind of reimagining film in that context. I find it really exciting to watch how the creative disciplines are having to refine themselves, because it was extremely siloed.
You mean with virtual production?
Yeah, exactly. So the virtual production is like a catalyst for the creative community to discover themselves again. So someone who's very skilled in a certain vertical had to accept that this is a new reality. And that also meant that the collaboration it feels more real. And it reminds me, I sort of started my career in the theatre, and it reminds me very much about how a theatre production comes together, where all the disciplines sort of meet up and say, okay, so what are we going to do? And I think that's really exciting. And then the tools that are being now created enables that creative kernel to be set in system in ways that actually is also quite efficient. So there's the excitement is not just a creative one or a cultural one. It's also one that delivers of the promise of using particularly the Unreal Engine is something really quite amazing, because it's not just about this structure, but it's the idea that you can start to use almost the Unreal Engine as a sort of as a basket of ideas, and you sort of turn it around like a tumble dryer, and out at the other end comes a film project.
Yeah, and everyone can feed into it and have access to that tumble dryer at the same time.
Exactly, and they could be shared across time zones and stakeholders, and it's not like it's a feeling of where you're actually going, as opposed to some storyboards or a script. I'm not saying storyboards or scripts are not important, but they are. This is sort of we take it to the next level.
Yeah, that's what really excites me about virtual production as well. And we've had other people on the series, like Felix George at Happy Mushroom, talking about that process and about how it really sort of liberates some of the creatives who had been a bit, siloed in the process. How does a studio? Where does a studio fit into that place? So, are you getting hands-on in terms of that sort of visualization and that, where do you fit into that creative process?
I think we like to think of ourselves as catalysts. So when someone shows up here, they will meet people who really care about the product the client is trying to make. So yes, there's a bunch of buildings. Yes, there is a contract and they pay rent and they pay for services. But we also like to think that they feel like they're coming to someone they feel akin with, that there are people like them, that understand their creative ambitions. So, and that could be a combination of sound stages or location shoots and virtual production. It could be that they want to create scenes in mocap and work out how it actually how to sort of to kind of break it down. It could be that they come early at script stage and say, we got something here that we're really trying to push off. They come here at script stage and try to see, do you think we can pull this off? And we may not never necessarily have the answers, but we certainly know who to ask. So we can say, oh, there's this really clever guy at Framestore or Cinecite, or there's someone at Third Floor, they were battling this on this project. And so I actually find it also very exciting that people are now feeling a bit more welcoming in sharing. And I think we should push that much further. Because it also comes down to another really big element of this, which is the whole sustainability drive. And sustainability isn't necessarily only about not traveling or being a bit efficient about use of energy and that sort of thing. It's also about sharing of assets.
Right.
So, this is all off the Unreal marketplace. We didn't pay 5p for this. And it's not because that itself is important. It is the fact that someone has made this, and now we're making use of it. We're promoting this. We're promoting, Epic and Unreal and their whole ecosystem, and that works in a way which is exciting. But I think what's really important is that when someone goes out there and invests in shooting plates that others can benefit from, I think it's really important that we try to reuse them, because how they're reused is going to be so different from the original production that no one's going to recognize it. It's not like I'm taking the footage from a certain film. I'm taking elements of the footage of the film and deconstructing it and reusing it. And I think that's not just about plates. It's also about other digital assets. So it could be props that you want to move in and out of foreground or in the middle ground or background. And it could be eventually also characters. So I'm really excited about the use of characters, crowds, in ways that can be that can create really efficient ways of telling these stories.
Do you think there needs to be some kind of sustainability audit about virtual production? Because there's a lot of, there's a lot of assumption, I suppose, that it's more sustainable. You're not moving people around, but would it be? Do you think it's possible to quantify that somehow and to get to measure it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it has to be done though by an independent body, or at least a framework that is relatively bulletproof. And I also don't think that it all has to be, look how good we are. I think it starts with an intention to do it right, and move in that direction. It's when they start to make statements of how sustainable they are that it becomes risky, because it's relatively easy to rip it apart. So I think the accountability element of it is important, but it's more important that they actually make the steps in the right direction so that they become more sustainable. And I think it's going to be not a luxury. It's going to be a necessity, and it's going to, as in every other industry. And I think so we have, as an example, we had a very interesting production here recently that was in the sound stages, but also they shot particular driving scenes in here, and that was driven by COVID restrictions. But when they actually had completed it, they said, "Why didn't we think about that from the beginning?" They couldn't fly to LA and do a driving scene with in the particular setting they were for all the restrictions. So they were forced to do it here, but when they had completed it, they said, "Hang on a minute, this was better." And not only was it creatively better than a complex driving scene in reality, but also it accomplished a huge ambition around the sustainability drive.
I guess it's the tester will be now. Well, we can't yet travel to the States, but when we can, or when things do fully open up, are people just going to flip back? What do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think what people are going to do is that they're going to say, "We're going on location to this magnificent place that has certain characteristics that we really want to be part of our film." They should still have that. But they may not have to be there for 8 weeks. They might be there for 4 weeks. And they may not necessarily bring all the crews and and cast that they originally thought. Because what they really need on location might be this magnificent vista, and with lots of sort of natural visual effects that is really hard to recreate, and it's not necessarily necessary. But whereas you do the reverse shot, and with dialogue involved, and you can recreate that easily on a stage like this. Even if it's a massive vista. And I think that's the kind of steps we're going to see. And I also would think that people still want to go to exotic locations, if that's right. And I think we will find an opportunity, which I'm really excited about, is for slightly lower budget films, who then say, I can use assets that exist. And as the whole Unreal marketplace evolves, there's quite a lot of really good assets, and they're going to be better and better, that will work for people. And they will embrace them in ways that are that we haven't even thought about yet, and modifications of them, where they actually would say, well, I'm going to take elements of Tokyo, and I'm going to get some freelancer in Tokyo to go and shoot a bunch of plates for me that I would then mash into an existing scene that exists, and here you go. So I think that's going to be really interesting to see where will you see people building from scratch as much as they used to? Probably not. And the more assets that are really available, I think there are going to be more people with creative ideas of reusing assets, because it also means that they can get further on smaller budgets.
How central do you see virtual production being at Garden Studios?
I think it's extremely central to what we do. But it's not the only thing we do. To some extent, it is an indication of where the industry is going, but it's certainly not a static situation. I think we just scratched the surface of where this is heading. And so the current state of virtual production is still nascent. And so if we look forward 4 or 5 years, we will have more stages here. We're already talking about, we are building a second stage straight away, and we're going to have a third and a fourth. But I'm also interested to see, what does a sound stage look like when you start thinking about sort of the introduction of technologies, and where are the different other types of technologies come into play? And we also think that the whole games universe is blending in, and also it's not just because of the technology, it's also because of the mindset. Someone who makes games, they think virtually. They think how the relative movements of cameras function in virtual space. And that's the really big difference between what happens in a virtual production stage and inside a virtual reality. Because this is not a virtual reality. This is a physical space where you are moving with a virtual background. So when Jamie moves the camera over and the background moves, the space here doesn't move. So when you actually then physically move across, you move across in real space, whereas the camera in the background moves in a unreal space. So it's a really interesting paradigm, and I think the whole games universe, people who are trained in games, they have that sort of ingrained, whereas the film community, they have to retrain to get it. And some do and some don't. You see DOPs here who really struggle with it, and then you see others who just, boom, they get it like 2 minutes. And that's exciting. It also means that young people, I go to the film school and I see you know, the really young people who are doing virtual production on a shoestring now, they're gonna, you know, do really well in this kind of setting. So, you know, and I think it's exciting. We have, you know, the good thing about future of film is that the future is always the future. So we can look over the horizon and we can pontificate about all kinds of stuff. We don't really know.
No.
But what is really exciting now is that no one really knows. And that means that everyone's sort of fumbling in the dark a bit together. And that's a fun thing when an industry is exploring with kind of an open mind. And if we can keep that sort of that mentality, I think we're in for a very exciting future.